Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week of MOPA in Focus. Each week we take a look at images in MOPA's permanent collection inspired by works that are on view currently at the museum. And of course, because we can't all be there physically right now, it's such a treat to be able to really take a look at the collection and bring some of those awesome examples of artists to all of you wherever you might be tuning in. I hope everybody's staying safe and comfortable wherever you may be. And just as a reminder, make sure to check out mopa.org. You can head on over there for all the latest information about the museum. Check out our current exhibitions online. You can also find more information and keep up to date with the museum. So I hope all of you get a chance to check that out. So for today's MOPA in Focus, as I mentioned, we're really using this program as an opportunity to take a look at the collection of the museum, which is over 9,000 images. The museum started collecting photographs in 1983, and so almost 40 years of collecting. And what's really wonderful about that is that any exhibition at the museum provides us an opportunity to either use the collection or to look at the artists whose work are on view and then look into the collection to see how have other artists explored that big idea, used a similar process. Maybe they were contemporaries, or one was a student of and one was the teacher. It's a really fantastic opportunity. And again, when you have over 9,000 images, the possibilities I like to think of are endless for the kinds of things that you can explore. So for today, we're going to be taking a look at an artist, and that artist's name is Nee Yuya. And Nee Yuya is a contemporary Chinese photographer that is in our current exhibition, which is Out of the Shadows, Contemporary Chinese Photography. And that exhibition presents the work of 9 different artists who have all used photography in really interesting ways to not only explore perhaps a subject, a topic, or a place, but it's also interesting in the ways that they use their own cultural background and they weave that into the work that they create. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up an example of Nee Yuya's work so all of you can get a chance to see. And this is the artist that we're going to be looking at. And of course, the topic for today, hopefully all of you got a chance to check out the TV guide that went out. The topic for today is photomontage. So sometimes we'll take a look at this big, broad idea that's conceptual, but other times we'll look at process, right? Because process a lot of times goes hand in hand with what the artist is trying to tell us, right? Or what the artist is trying to communicate. And so with Nee Yuya, even though these look like vintage photographs, which they are, and we'll get into that in just a second, we can see, I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen for everyone. We can see that it is the process of stitching together these images, right? Now, a lot of you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between collage and montage, right? A lot of us might have experience in creating photo collages or even photo montages. And really the difference is the way you go about it and what your intention is, right? Intention's a big part of creating photographic work. And so photo montage is about bringing together different kinds of images to be able to create a new work that's cohesive. And so that's different than a photo collage, which might be a fun activity of going through magazines and going through newsprint media and putting those things together in a way that doesn't necessarily have to be coherent, right? A lot of us probably in our youth, or even if we're young right now, have created these cutouts, right? Have created these different kinds of collages. So photomontage is kind of taking it that one step further. How can you take these different kinds of images and bring them back together to create this really cohesive whole, but also something I like to think of that's more interesting than the sum of its parts, right? There's that idea of synecdoche, right? Where something is sort of, you arrive at this new image, right? This new kind of way of saying something about a place, about an idea, things like that. So what I'd like to do is if we could take a step back into the collection, and what we're going to go ahead and do is take a look at some earlier examples of photo montages. Now, photo montages can be done in quite a few different ways. We see some artists who do it using printed photographs like Nee Yuya. Those are vintage photographs. We also see other artists who use mixed media. They bring in different kinds of processes like painting, like newsprint, drawings. Other artists, which we're probably most familiar with nowadays, are using digital methods, right? The P word, Photoshop. So many of us have access to these new digital tools to be able to put images together in interesting ways. So for us exploring the collection, I want to take a look at this artist who's in the museum's collection. And the artist's name, his name was Harry Bowers. Now, Harry Bowers is creating this photo montage, and we can clearly see there's some different kinds of media, right? There's drawing, there's this red paint in a particular area. And what Harry Bowers did is start out with this image, right? This figure huddled on top of a chair, and then began to layer different elements on top. And what was really interesting is that photography not only played a role in him creating that original image of the huddled figure, but what he would do is, after layering all of these different materials, he would go ahead and sandwich it between pieces of glass, and then he would re-photograph it. So what we have is we have this image that suddenly has a lot of depth to it. It has a lot of really interesting nuance in the way the shadows play, and in the figure itself, and that kind of interesting sort of almost like a fabric background to the figure. So this is one example of photo montage, really a mixed media piece in the museum's collection. And for another image that's perhaps a bit more contemporary, and one that I think I love to reference because I think this is something that all of us could do, or something we could kind of play around with the idea. Photo montage, because it's bringing together different kinds of images, perhaps from different times and different places, you can really start to play with this idea of time, right? We're so used to thinking of one photograph taken at a particular time in a particular place. But once we start pulling images in from different times, different places, perhaps ones that we've taken or perhaps ones that we found or that we have, we suddenly have this ability to show a viewer something a little bit different about the passage of time, right? So this image that you see on screen, and I'm going to go ahead and full screen it here for everyone. This is an image by the photographer and artist Byron Wolfe. And Byron Wolfe really explores this idea of the passage of time, of the landscape, of destinations and travel. And what I love about this image is that it's using images that we're all very familiar with. They're these snapshots, and we can see we're seated in a car, and the arrangement plays an important part, I think, in this piece. So we see this view, and we're in a car. And in the center of the image, we see that it's the open road. And then as we look left and right, it's a bit like we're in the car, right? Looking left and looking right around our surroundings. And actually, these images were taken over a period of 2 days. On this road trip that he was taking with his son here in the United States. And I really love that. You know, we can kind of think of almost reading this image, right? At the museum, we love to talk about reading images because images always have something to tell us. And if we sort of read this image of images. From left to right, we perhaps see sort of an early scene, right? His kiddo sleeping in the car, like a lot of our family trips, right? We set out early to get a nice head start, and then everybody very soon sort of knocks out in the back seat. And then as we sort of come to the middle of the image, we see the open road. It looks like midday, late morning or midday. We have the blue sky. And then as we kind of come full circle towards the right, we see the kiddo asleep again, right? I love this because, again, you can play with these ideas like the passage of time in an image. And that's going to be really important for when we get to the contemporary Chinese photographer, Nee Yuya, who was really the inspiration for this week's theme, because he also explores this idea of time, but then rather than using images that he's taken, he's using images that he's found, collected, and purchased in different locations. Another artist that I want us to go ahead and get a chance to talk about is going to be the artist that we have in the collection that's a more recent addition. And the image just came up on screen, and this artist's name, her name is Isabella Lemay. And Isabella Lemay creates what she likes to call hyper collages. And they are digitally produced. I'll go ahead and full screen it for you. But there are these wonderful nature scenes. And I love this image for its circular format too. That was actually at a time there was it was popular that you would get your photographs printed actually circular, so you can see photographs from the late 1800s, early 1900s, some really fun sort of snapshots, but they're actually circular. And I love how that also speaks to photography, because if all of us could kind of shrink down and step inside a camera, there's nothing square about the image that's coming through the lens and being focused by the lens. It is a circular image. However, we just tend to crop it, right, into a square for us to be able to compose and center all the different aspects of it. But Isabella Lemay is, again, using these digital tools and digital techniques to create this hyper-realistic image, which really invites all of us into these wonderful scenes of nature, of wildlife. Here we have hummingbirds and this beautiful lily or flower suspended down. And what's really, I think, interesting about digital photomontage and these techniques is that it's an opportunity for the artist to really have a say in the placement of every single detail in the image. And with this image in particular, what I really love about it is that it also it's almost like a raindrop. I like to think of, right? The way you sort of see an image sort of focused by the tension, right, of the water and that water droplet because of the circularness of it. And of course, there's, this is a very lush scene in nature, but I just absolutely love that aspect of it. So we can see how Ysabel LeMay is using digital photomontage techniques to create these hyper-realistic images that show nature in this truly vivid and amazing way. And so the last image that I want to show from our collection is also another recent addition to the collection at the museum, which also takes advantage of these digital techniques for bringing images together, stitching images together. And this is an image by the artist Julie Blackman. And Julie Blackman is an American photographer living and working in the Midwest. And she creates these scenes. I like to call them tableaus. And a tableau is this beautifully constructed scene, right? And she creates these scenes from all of these different parts of different images and brings them together to explore ideas about home life, about being both a mother and a photographer. She grew up in a large family, and so she uses photography and the ability to stitch different images together to arrive at images that convey a sense of place, but also a mood, right? A particular feeling in these tableaus. And here we have this sort of wonderful scene. I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen for everyone. We have this scene of this young girl on the staircase in this home, and we can see her with her crimped hair, and she's in her nightgown, and she's holding a brush, but she doesn't exactly look very happy in this image. So we can think maybe something just went wrong, maybe she was having a fight with a sibling, and then on the floor, we see these scattered pieces. We see parts of a doll. And then what's even more interesting, too, is we see that door just beside the staircase that's kind of cracked open just a little bit. And we have just this sort of thinnest sliver of someone's hand. So we can see that there's a figure. For any of you who grew up in a house with a basement, they're kind of these really magical places for kids growing up. They're both really exciting because it's kind of a different part of the house, but they're also can be a little disconcerting as well, right? Because it's underground and it's often darker, has sort of this different feeling. So we have this very heavy interior scene with this young girl here, clearly upset about something, and again, it invites us into this really sort of interesting moment, right? In a lot of young people's lives and a lot of family lives, right? This might be a familiar scene for any of you out there who are hunkered down in a home with a big family, taking care of lots of different things all at once. We all know that that the emotions ebb and flow throughout the day. So maybe this resonates with a lot of you out there. So this sort of brings us up, because this image was created in the early 2000 teens, and the museum collected it pretty recently in probably 2014, 2015. But I want to take us to the artist that inspired the talk for today. And that artist's, again, name is Nee Yuya. And again, what I love about this artist and all the artists in Out of the Shadows, contemporary Chinese photography, is that they're using photography in interesting ways, but they're also exploring something about their identity, right? Not all the photographers are living in China right now. Some of them live in the United States. They're sort of spread across. But what all their work share in common is that they're drawing different inspirations from a collective cultural identity. And this artist, again, Nee Yuya, is using photomontage to stitch together scenes using old vintage photographs. The first thing to talk about is the landscape, because these are all landscape shots by the artist. And the landscape is really important in traditional artistic practices in China. It's a little interesting, a little tidbit. The word landscape comes in Chinese is called shan shui. And shan shui is essentially the words mountain and river. The two characters combined makes the word landscape. And so thinking about those idealistic scenes of flowing rivers and the mountains, we have an artist who's trying to get at that, but rather than do it with pen and ink or with other more traditional means or mediums, we have Nee Yuya collecting these vintage snapshots as he's traveling. So he's going to flea markets, he's going to different locations, and he's buying these landscape photos. And we all have these kinds of photographs laying around, whether they're ones we took or whether they're from other family members. And what he's doing is as he's collecting them, he's building up this big sort of collection of landscapes, and then can start juxtaposing them, right? Or piecing them, stitching them together in these interesting ways. And so rather than just one scene at one particular time, what we actually have is we have different times, different, maybe even different locations, but with the way that they're actually stitched together creates this really interesting element. And again, speaking to that that ideal, right? Of the ideal landscape. We probably all have a notion of it in our heads, and in traditional practices in China and artistic practices, there are particular qualities to it. Everything from the composition to the kinds of images that, or the kinds of elements that are incorporated in it. And I want to go ahead and show another example here, and make these full screen, because you really have to come visit them at the museum once we're open again to be able to appreciate it, because he's stitching them together in ways that are so beautifully seamless. These are actually the physical photographs. So if you think about, using an X-Acto knife and cutting along just the right line to be able to combine these images together. And again, I love what it speaks to when we think of time as well, and the passage of time. This is such a cool shot because it's creating, if we're following the line of the landscape, right, of the mountains in the background, we have this wonderful, beautiful flow. It seems seamless apart from the tonality of the images are different. But then we suddenly have this airplane, right, that's appearing in multiple locations at the same time. And I love that idea about the photo montage. We can think about perhaps taking photographs of someone walking down the street, and as we're taking each of those shots, they're in a slightly different location. And if we were to print all of those out and then rearrange it in the way that the background still looks seamless, we would suddenly have that repetition of the subject through the frame and through the image. So I hope you got a chance to feel a little bit of inspiration from those examples. We'll have all the information about the artists in the links below and in the descriptions, so make sure to check out more of their work, head on over to their websites, and also make sure to head on over to mopa.org, where you can find all the information about the current exhibition, Out of the Shadows, Contemporary Chinese Photography. It's a really interesting exhibition with lots of different kinds of works, all exploring the different ways that the photographic arts can be used. Thanks again for everybody for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place, where we'll actually be drawing inspiration from a different exhibition we have up at the museum right now, which is called Illusion, the Magic of Motion. And so next week we're going to be taking a look at early cinema, so those first moving images and some really cool examples. Thanks everyone for joining today, and we look forward to seeing you next week for another MOPA in Focus.